Scott, welcome back to the podcast. It's good to have you here.
Thanks. Good to be here.
We got a lot of stuff to talk about because you've been a busy guy this spring and summer. You're re-releasing a lot of your work.
Yeah, it feels like I'm not doing much of anything. I've had a couple of shorts, but nothing of any length since last October. But a few months ago, I decided that I was going to kind of move away from doing romance stuff. Not that I won't ever dip my toe in that particular pool again, because I've got a lot of friends there, and I do enjoy it from time to time. But I did pull the rights for my 2 trilogies. And so I'm re-releasing those. July 10th was the first one, and that was for the Liminal Sky series. I'm also kind of rebranding. I had the Liminal Sky and I had the Skythane Oberon series, and they both ended up kind of hooking together at the end in the same universe, which is kind of a cool Easter eggy sort of thing. So I'm rebranding them as Liminal Sky Ariadne Cycle, and then the Oberon is now Liminal Sky Oberon Cycle. So they're both part of the same thing, and they're going to carry covers that have the same font face, the same kind of look, so that they kind of tie together as an overall series, even though they have their own looks as trilogies. So yeah, by December, I should have all 6 of my sci-fi novels back out again.
Did you intend to make one big universe, or did that just kind of happen as you wrote?
It just really kind of happened. Somewhere around book 2 on both series, I did this really stupid, weird thing where I decided to write 2 trilogies at once, and I went back and forth. So I did book 1 of one, and then book 1 of the other, and then 2 and 2. I started to realize that maybe the generation ship in the first series ended up at the location of the second series. And so that's when I started kind of putting together a timeline and thinking how this whole thing might latch together. There's actually one item in particular that kind of runs through the entire series and shows up at the end. So you see it in the first book and you see it in the last book. So it was kind of cool to put those little Easter egg things in there for folks that really read both series and kind of get into them and figure out what they are.
You mentioned getting away from romance a little bit. What kind of brought that on, and where do you see yourself kind of going forward at this point?
Sure. So I never had romance as one of my first loves. I got into it in the beginning because my husband Mark was reading a lot of gay romance, and he knew who a lot of the publishers were. And I had decided to try to get back to writing. And all these publishers had these calls for submissions out for anthologies. And I thought, well, I could try that. I could try breaking into it and see if I can get into one of those. And I ended up getting my first story published, The Bear at the Bar, which is actually now out in its own version, and now it's in the Spells and Stardust anthology. And that kind of got me going. And so I ended up submitting to a number of publishers, and I got published with 3 or 4 of them. And that was my way in. But I always kind of wrote things that were, Angel would call them probably romance-ish. She set me straight early on that, romance is its own thing and it has its own rules. And just because your story has a romance in it doesn't make your story a romance. It's only a romance if romance actually is the plot of the story. So my Oberon cycle, Skythane, Lander, and Ithani, they have a very strong romance thread to them, but they're arguably maybe not romance, even though they were published under that thread. But again, my first love was always sci-fi and fantasy, which I started reading when I was in maybe 10 years old, 11 years old. And I always wanted to be published there. That's where I wanted to go. So what I'm trying to do now is make the leap from the smaller publishers into the mainstream. And so my path right now is either finding an agent and getting into a big publisher, or going it alone and doing it myself, or maybe, again, being kind of a hybrid author and seeing if I can pull off both things. But my thrust now is to really write diverse science fiction fantasy that still is a big part of the queer community in it, but that is not romance-based.
You've gotten some pickup in some magazines and things that kind of move you more towards that direction too recently.
I had wanted to get into the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, SFWA, which I always thought it was SFWA, but it's SFWA. And there are 2 ways to do that. You can either get published in a magazine that pays a certain set rate per word, which was about 4 times, 5 times whatever I made on any anthology, or you can sell $3,000 worth of one story in 1 year, one book in 1 year. And there's some combinations you can make to get that amount, but basically those are the 2 levels. I was lucky enough to have a story and then a second one picked up by the late Mike Resnick, who ran Galaxy's Edge. And it was actually the one story I'd sent it to him, and it got bounced back to me by his gatekeeper, but I had sent it to him directly as well because he'd asked for a copy of it. And so I went back to him and I said, well, can I send you another one now because, you didn't want the first one? He said, well, actually, I wanted to send you a contract. I was just about to buy the thing from you. So that kind of going around the gatekeeper thing actually ended up working. So yeah, he bought a couple of the stories, and that got me into SIFWA, and I was later able to level up to the full membership in the organization. It's kind of hard to make that leap because people get used to you doing what you're doing. You get a certain following that's used to your current stuff, and yeah, it was never fully romance, but a lot of my fans are on the romance side. It's hard to break into the bigger market.
But you're chipping away at it now, which is very cool.
Yeah, I'm doing the whole agent thing, and I'm a very obsessively organized person about things, generally speaking. And so when I decided to look for an agent, I created a spreadsheet, of course, first thing. I started out with about 12 or 14 agents, and I just kept adding to those over time. And there's a thing on Twitter called #MSWL, which is manuscript wish list, which you can follow, and agents will pop up there what they're looking for. And sometimes they're absurdly specific. Like they'll say, I want like a Victorian fantasy novel with zombies. And does anybody have that out there? Send it to me. But sometimes they're more like general, like I'm looking for marginalized writers writing science fiction. And so I'll pick up things from there. At my last check, I had 110 agent submissions out there of the book, the current book I'm working on, or just the one I'm working on for getting into an agent. And of those, I had about 70 come back and say no. And the rest are active ones, and I've still got a batch of ones to try at the same agencies if those ones reject me. So it's this huge process, and it's a lot harder than I thought it would be emotionally, mostly. But I'm going to give it basically to the end of the year. I'll let this kind of cycle run through. I'm just about completed on another book. My thought is that I'll finish this through this batch of agents, and if and when nobody takes it, then I will start working on it and plan to release that on my own. And then, do you know what Pitch Wars? Are you familiar with Pitch Wars is? That's coming up again this month. Basically, it's a mentoring competition where you put in your work and you try to connect with a mentor, and the mentor then, if they like you, works with you to try to get your manuscript ready for agents, and then they do an agent showcase in the spring. I did it last year with this book. It didn't get picked up by anybody. I found out after the fact that there were about 130 manuscripts for every mentor that was in the competition. So your odds of getting kind of a callback are low, and your odds of being chosen are even lower. But I'm going to try it again,
Sure.
See what happens, and then I will probably go the agent route with this one now that I've got all these agents on my list and see, the one thing I'm trying to remember is that each one of these things is a learning experience. And, if it ended up just being on my own and publishing, I've got a friend of mine who's going to mentor me in kind of going that path, who's done very well over the last 12, 14 years with his own works. So, that may be where I end up. I may just do self-published on everything.
And what is coming up for new work? You've got all these re-releases happening through the end of the year. When do fans get to see something new come into their TBR?
The thing that I'm working on right now, I'd written this book called The Last Run, this novella. This is one of my stories that I tried to get into some magazines to try to get into SIFWA. And it never did get picked up by anybody, so I ended up publishing it myself as a novella. And it's a whole new world, I think. It's possible that it will end up being linked back to these other worlds. I'm not quite sure how, because in the connection of the other two series, I had destroyed Earth, and then I had to undestroy Earth to make it work. And in this one, I destroy Earth at a different point in time. So I kind of have it in for Earth, I think. So I don't know. It may be its own separate universe. I'm thinking about linking it to some other works I've done. But the thing I'm writing right now is actually using this as kind of an origin story, and then going about 150 years forward in the future from this book. And it's a trilogy it kind of borrows from Anne McCaffrey in terms of having a sort of a fantasy, sci-fi, colonized world. There's even sort of dragons, but they're not really dragons. So I'm trying to make sure I differentiate that, because I don't want to be, here's a clone of Pern, basically. But it is letting me play in the fantasy world a bit, even though there's not magic per se, in a way that I really haven't done for a while and really enjoying a lot. And again, trying to apply all those things that I learned from the last couple books and the lessons from the agent process to try to make this thing kind of shine. So that's one. Number two is in the world of the Stark Divide. When I said I destroyed the Earth, some people survived, and they were on the moon. And so the book that I'm shopping to agents right now, and that I will eventually release on my own if it doesn't get sold, is called Drop Knots, and it's the story of the people that survived back when this ship left the Earth, and how, after the war cleared up enough, decided to go back down to Earth, and what they found, and kind of what comes from that. So that is a standalone right now. It might be a series at some point, but that's the one that's out there. And the last thing, it's kind of in the mix, other than my short stories that I have out, I plan to do the interim series at some point in the next year or two between the Liminal Sky Ariadne cycle and the Liminal Sky Oberon cycle, that tells you what happened after this lets off, but before, and then once they get to the new world. So kind of fill in all those gaps.
Now, you've been known for quite some time for organizing flash fiction anthologies. And this year, you're actually doing one that's not flash fiction called Fix the World. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we've always done the flash fiction ones. This is our most recent innovation, came out about a month ago. And they're, 300-word stories. We do 120 authors. That's through Queer Sci-Fi. But I've had this idea bouncing around in my head for a couple of years to do something hopeful in the sci-fi space. And it kind of linked up with this idea of taking our publisher, Other Worlds Inc., and going beyond just publishing these things for Queer Sci-Fi and publishing my own stuff. So the idea is basically there's a lot of stuff going wrong. We've got racism, we've got inequality, we've got climate change, we've got all of the kinds of big and little issues around the world right now. And there's times when it feels just like it's overwhelming and like we're on this path to destruction and we may be the last generation that actually gets to live the way that we live. The next generation may have a lot less, or the world may be in turmoil. So I wanted to find a way to put something positive out. So the Fix the World anthology, the idea is that we take an existing world problem right now and you jump forward a bit and you figure out how we fixed it. And you write a story around that. And it doesn't have to be necessarily the thrust of the story, but it should be an important part of it. And it doesn't matter how big or small the problem is. It can be as small as a genetic engineering to save a species. It can be as big as, figuring out how to counteract climate change by putting satellites in space and reflecting light back to this, out into the outer reaches. I'm really excited about it.
And does it have a target release date?
It's probably going to be in the spring.
Fantastic. And talk to us a little bit about innovation from this year's flash fiction as well. How did that go this year? How many flash stories ended up in this year's anthology?
It's 120. It was 110 till last year. Then we bumped it up a little bit because we had so many submissions. We had, I think, 256 last year. And we did a little lower than that this year, 235, which I was not sure at all how it was going to go because our launch period was March 1st, and then we ran through April 10th, which put us like dead smack in the middle of when this whole thing just went crazy with the pandemic. So I was a little worried we weren't going to get enough stories. And I was very pleasantly surprised when we actually did. So yeah, it's got 120 stories. They are heavy to sci-fi like they always are, but each year we've noticed we've gotten more and more stories beyond the kind of standard male-male stories. This year we actually had more female-female lesbian stories than we did male-male for the first time. And we also had a nice selection of kind of everything else of the LGBTIQA alphabet. So yeah, it's a good collection. I was quite happy with it.
Under your banner, you have so many things that kind of come under Other Worlds Inc. and kind of the overall banner of things that you do. Several years ago came up with Queer Romance Inc., which is a great resource, putting romance into one place where it can be found and searched in a way that's easier than how you might do it on an Amazon or a Barnes & Noble site or something like that. You've now rolled out one for speculative fiction.
Right. It kind of mirrors my own journey. So, Queer Romance Inc. is where I was at the time. That one actually came about because of the collapse of all romance ebooks, ARE. I remember talking at the time to Cage Harper about possibly launching a site. Cage was looking at the possibility of doing a co-op type site. And, I said, we're looking at doing our own site. We had this idea for it. But, if you guys do that too, I would happily support that as well. I think the more competition, the better. The more people out there pushing this stuff, the better. That never happened, but Cage did end up helping me work on some of the basics on getting the site launched. And that site now gets about 35,000 visitors a month, so it's doing really well. I'd always wanted to have, again, the sci-fi thing going. And I thought about launching a sci-fi version of it the year after, but I really wasn't connected well enough at the time into the sci-fi market, to authors, to everything else. So I took the last couple of years and really worked on making those connections. And once the pandemic hit, it was kind of a scary time because one of our main sites is our travel site. And our travel site, for all effects and purposes, is probably dead until next year. Yeah, some people are traveling again. People are traveling in New Zealand, Australia. People are traveling a bit in Europe. But the market is still really down. In the United States, there just is no travel market right now. So we decided we needed to accelerate some of our other plans, some other things we had in the fire. And one of those was liminal fiction. So we ended up launching it. I couldn't actually get the domain liminalfiction.com because somebody else owned it. We launched with limfic.com, and then I found out his domain was expiring a few weeks later and made him an offer. And now we have both limfic.com and liminalfiction.com, so it worked out. The idea behind the site is basically that it's author-driven, like Queer Romance Inc., that authors can put their own books on it, can promote them, and then we also do a lot of work to promote both frontlist and backlist books, and that it makes them findable in ways that you can't find them anywhere else. Specifically on Limfic, that means we have, I think, 135 subgenres of fantasy, sci-fi, horror, and science fiction. And so if you want that, one book that is, alien invasion, or you want the book that is werewolves and paranormal, or you want the book that is comedy horror, you can actually drill down and find those things and then filter them by a lot of other things to locate exactly the kind of book that you want. So yeah, we're excited about it. It's doing well so far. It's growing pretty quickly. It's going to take a while before it gets kind of up to where QRI is, but I think eventually it will probably surpass it just because it's a mainstream market. And there's a lot of folks that read and write mainstream speculative fiction.
So I understand you've got a little bit of show and tell for us as we wrap up.
So I have my first Italian language book out. People who have read the River City Chronicles will recognize the cover. This is something I had translated as I was actually writing the book because I have friends in Italy and a couple of the characters are based on them. So I had it translated every week on my blog in Italian and published it both in English and Italian. So I finally got the Italian version out a couple months ago, and it hasn't sold actually it sold one copy yesterday, but it's being read on Kindle Unlimited, and I've probably had about 15, 20 book reads in the last 2 or 3 weeks. The one that hasn't been read yet, and this is my real show and tell thing, this is the dual language edition, so it's got both the English and the Italian. It's 800 pages long, and this is a doorstop.
Yes, it is.
This one I basically put out there because Mark and I study Italian, and I thought it'd be cool for Italian study groups or schools to have a book they could use if they wanted that was an American story, but in both languages. So yeah, I only have 2 copies of this because they're not cheap either, but yeah, it's just kind of fun to have, and it's a good conversation piece. It will hold your door open if you don't use it for anything else.
So what's the best way for folks to keep up with you and keep track of new work and find out what you're doing across all the various outlets that you've got?
So best thing is to sign up for my mailing list. If you go to J. Scott Coatsworth, and it's just like it sounds, coats like coats or jackets, and then worth, WRTH.com. There's a mail list sign up, and you will get a free ebook copy of Spells and Stardust, which is my anthology of 8 of my short stories. And then I'll let you know in my regular newsletter, it goes out once a week, what's going on with me. You can also find me on Facebook. I have a Facebook page and my own Facebook profile, J. Scott Coatsworth there. I'm on technically Twitter and Instagram. I don't do a whole lot with Instagram, but I do put out regular notices on Twitter, so you can follow me on Twitter as well if you want to get notifications when I put those out.
Fantastic. We'll link to those plus everything we talked about in the show notes so that folks can get there really easily.